Welcome to the National Museum of Industrial History. I'm Andrea Zaya, I'm the director at the museum. Thank you for joining us today for World's Fair Weekend. We have a number of exciting events happening here this season. You can keep in the loop by following us on social media, checking our website, and if you've enjoyed the programming today, we are running a very special membership promotion, 10% off, and your admission cost also goes into the cost of membership. So it's a really great deal. Please join us today. You can ask one of our staff members about it. This weekend, we celebrate the ingenuity that debuted at our World's Fairs. Many visitors to the museum are fascinated by the photograph to your left in this room. This is showing us the construction of the Bell Labs Pavilion for the 1964 New York World's Fair. It is, the construction is the Bethlehem Steel's Division, Fabricated Steel Construction Group, and it's a wonderful early stage of constructing this iconic dome-like structure. Some of our visitors today at the museum have told me that they actually had an opportunity to be there at the 1964 World's Fair. Special thanks also to Bob Dare, and Bob from the Boyertown Museum of Historic Vehicles shared this very unique collection you see in this display case, also to your left. We also thank Ron Smith for sharing his incredible award-winning 1914 Ford Model T National Award winner with us here today. You see that in the lobby space. And from one Ford to another, Allentown's own Lee Iacocca recognized the potential market appeal of a sporty yet practical two-door car, and the 1964 World's Fair hosted the perfect audience. In the unheard-of time frame of only 18 months, they developed this brand new model from concept to finished product. Thank you for joining us today to hear about the remarkable story of the debut of the Ford Mustang. And so it's my honor to introduce our presenter this afternoon. Jeff Bliemeister is the Executive Director of America's Transportation Experience at the AACA Museum in my former hometown of Hershey, PA. He has worked as a museum professional for over 35 years. He holds a BA in History and Political Science from the State University of New York College and an MA in History Museum Studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program. He first became interested in World's Fairs during a college internship at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, where he researched the city's 1901 Pan American Exposition. His work served as the outline narrative for a semi-permanent exhibition. So we are very much grateful to have him here today with us. Please help me in welcoming Jeff Bliemeister.
Thank you, Andrea. It's my pleasure to be here. I couldn't ask for more than to spend 2 hours driving down here from Hershey in my convertible with the top down. It didn't rain. I worked on sun tanning my bald head. It's great to be out. It's great to be here at this wonderful museum. And I'm really fortunate to be in front of you folks. So how many of you have is there anyone here who was at the World's Fair, 1964-65? Awesome. I found out a few years ago from my mother that I was there too. My dad was in the Army at that point. He was a high school music teacher, and he was, instead of being drafted, he elected to join the Army, and he was in the Army band. He traveled all around the world. One of his stops was in New York City, and my family, when I was very little, lived on Staten Island. I didn't know much about it. But my mother told me, oh yeah, one day I was bored, and I took you to the World's Fair. Of course, I was in a baby buggy. I said, do you remember the Mustang? She says, I was too busy just trying to get through the day. I had no idea about the Mustang. But I can say I was at the World's Fair, although I was in a different set of wheels, not a Mustang, but a baby buggy at the time. How many people have owned a Mustang at one point in their life? Don't have to be hesitant, they're great cars. Beg your pardon? Soon, okay, yeah, great. The Mustang, as you're going to find out, is kind of an all-purpose car. The way it was intended, you could build it just about any way you want, from an all-out race-type muscle car to a conservative gas-sipping six-cylinder version, or you can make a luxury ride out of it. So, as Andrea said, Lee Iacocca, the native Lee Iacocca, was really instrumental in getting that car going. So, I'm going to spend about half an hour here going over some slides. I'm going to try not to bore you too badly, and I've got a couple of videos for you at the very end as well. To really understand the concept of the Mustang, you have to go all the way back to the Great Depression. Stock market crash, mass unemployment, loss in wages and value for the dollar, and the Great Depression lasted. Gave birth to a lot of the government, Civilian Conservation Corps, about 30 or 40 different alphabet-styled or named programs that were created back at that point to try and help pull the country out of the Depression. And they did help, but really the Depression continued until World War II. World War II, and another big point is, during that time, of course, you wouldn't want to bring a child into that kind of environment. It lasted 10 years, so birth rates went way down as well during the Great Depression. World War II created full employment. There was plenty to do because the country went on. All the industries were turned over to the war armament. So there were plenty of jobs. Our gross national product took a dramatic increase. And with the surrender of Japan and the end of World War II, you can see from 1940 or so on up, the gross national product, the way it took off. And then at the same time, people returned from the war. There's a sense of prosperity. The United States is now the most powerful economic and military country in the world, and people feel a little bit more confident about bringing children into this environment. So you can see here in the red, after World War II, the spike goes up for population. So now you have an environment where you have, in 15 to 20 years, all these baby boomers, as they're called, are going to be car buyers. And at that point also, most families in the United States were single car families. Many families had 0 cars, depending on where you lived and what you did. Demographics at that point predicted that there was going to be a huge boom, not only with the population, but in an audience to buy automobiles. So how would car manufacturers respond to that growing market? 2-seat sports cars were not new. The Thunderbird came out in 1955. The Chevrolet Corvette beat it by a couple of years in 53. The Corvette initially was not a great seller. It was a 2-seater. It was a concept car that the GM rushed to production because it was so well received, but it's not a practical car for a family. It has 2 seats. It's sporty. It's beautiful. Thunderbird also sold a little bit better initially, but also not a practical car. There's no back seat. It's just not practical. You know, there were GIs that came back from World War II that were interested in sports cars because they had driven them while they were in Europe, and they were exciting. And there was a market for something sporty and exciting, but not 2 seats. Chevrolet introduced the Corvair in 1960. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Corvair a little bit later. One of the starting points for the cars, of course, is Iacocca, as Andrea mentioned. Local native. There's some facts on him on the screen right there. He was a Ford employee for several decades. He is a local graduate of Lehigh, and he went to graduate school at Princeton on a scholarship that he earned. He's a very bright man. He was also a natural salesman. So he found out quickly that he did not want to be in engineering. So he was famous for putting together a couple really interesting sales tactics in Ford that caught the attention of national headquarters in Dearborn. So they quickly moved him to Dearborn, where he started to rise up through the ranks. He became VP and general manager of the Ford division in 1960 at the age of 36, which is pretty young. One of the things he wanted to do was bring Ford back into racing. The slogan, "What wins on Sunday sells on Monday," was really popular in the 50s and 60s, and it did carry some weight. So he went, with the help of his executives, started the Total Performance Program at Ford, which led to several key things. It was also part of the program that, if you remember Ford versus Ferrari a few years ago, Le Mans, that was part of the Total Ford program, Total Performance Program at Ford. He realized when he did a comparison and a lineup of all the different models that Ford had versus their competitors, that they were missing a sporty car. And GM had already started that with the Corvair that we saw a few slides back. Corvair was a 4-seat car, though, and had a rear engine which was air-cooled. And then, of course, if you know anything about automotive history, the car took a real bad hit when Ralph Nader called it unsafe at any speed. So it never really got a fair chance. So what Iacocca wanted to do was create a car similar to that, but a little more practical, a little easier to produce, and a little more, I guess, beneficial for a family, a little more variable. You could do more with it. He had one problem though. Everyone here have heard of the Edsel before? Edsel was synonymous with failure, especially automotive failure. The Edsel was introduced at a poor time, and it destroyed Ford internally. It lost $350 million, equivalent of almost $3 billion in today's money. They wanted to have another niche. Ford wanted to compete with General Motors and Chrysler by having a fourth division. So Edsel was supposed to fill a gap and sell cars to people from a different class, different price point. Unfortunately, it didn't take off. It lost a lot of money, and afterwards, Henry Ford II was not he was not interested in talking to anyone about any new car models. He did not want to lose that kind of money ever again. So that made people at Ford, particularly Iacocca, very hesitant to go forward with their new program. So what he did, he started something called the Fairlane Committee. And the Fairlane Committee met at the Fairlane Motor Inn, which was new at that time, outside of Dearborn, about 2 miles from the headquarters. And he would have a small group of people meet after hours. And they would discuss the practicality of creating this new car and what it might imply. He purposely kept it on one side of town that was away from where where the country club and the fancy people, the fancy executives went. He didn't want a lot of internal noise about this until he was ready to present the car. These are some of the broad goals. I won't read them to you, but you can take a look at them. The big ones were the cost. It had to be $2,500 or less because it had to appeal to people, but it also had to look good and had to be exciting, and it had to be able to be adapted to whatever you wanted in terms of your personality or function, what you wanted to do with it as a car. And he had to have it done in time because he wanted to jump the gun and introduce it at the New York World's Fair because that was a huge event coming up. And if you could introduce it mid-year, you'd get a jump on your competitors in terms of marketing. That's why some of you may have heard that some of the Ford Mustangs are considered 64.5s rather than 65s. There's really no such thing as a 65, or a 64.5. But if the car was introduced built before August and introduced early in the year, it has several different features, and it got Ford a 6-month jump on the competition in terms of sales. So if you've had a chance to see my car that I drove here this morning, it's a 64.5. It's green, it's out front, and I'm happy to have you take a look at it after the presentation. Interestingly, though, there were a couple other things that happened at the same time. I found, one of the things that I find fascinating, Ford produced 2 prototypes or concept cars that were both called Mustang. This one was a very impractical but sporty 2-seater that made its debut at Watkins Glen in New York at the racetrack. And it was a lot of fun, it generated a lot of interest, and they called it Mustang. That was about 2 years before the car came out. Not something you really want to drive on the street, and again, back to the 2-seat sports car program, not practical for a mass audience. So then the second concept, Mustang 2, came out right before the Mustang's debut, and you can see the Mustang in this one. You can't see the front of this, but this might have a Cougar grill in the front of it. What I found really interesting is that I always assumed the car was just going to be Mustang. That was the name of the car. Initially, Ford didn't have a name for it. They called it T5. That was the internal project name for the car. And then they started going through a whole alphabet of different animals and different possibilities, going through every noun in the book, trying to figure out what might make for an interesting car. And they already had 2 cars built named Mustang. So it wasn't until late in the game that they actually named it Mustang. The prototype, you can see, is pretty close to what the car was that was produced. There's a few little things in it that are different, but you can recognize it generally as a Mustang. Mustang was really a joint project from a lot of people. They call Lee Iacocca the father of the Mustang. If someone's the architect of the Mustang, it's Hal Sperlich. His title is up there. He was the one who came up with one brilliant idea. He decided that it would be practical to take the Ford Falcon platform, which was an economy car that had come out a few years earlier, and simply reskin it and rebadge it and turn it into the Mustang. And that saved Ford about $350 million in development money, which is essentially what they lost with the Edsel. So they had a contest in-house to come up with a design, and they came up with, a lot of people entered internally, and the long hood, short deck concept was generated from that. And that savings there, the $350 million, was enough to present the car to Lee Iacocca, have Lee Iacocca present the car to Henry Ford II and have it approved. It's an interesting story also. When they finally had it all ready and done, and they had it in clay, and they wanted to show it to Henry Ford, they introduced it to him, and he looked at it, made a face. Apparently he was very unhappy and just walked away. And they found out afterwards that he actually liked the car. He was on the way to the hospital. He had mononucleosis. So a lot of things came together very well to put Mustang in a place where it could actually be built, as Andrew said, in a very short time frame. And when it was time to release the car, the World's Fair was the venue. And at that point, and maybe in history, it was the largest, most intricate car release ever. They, back in the old, decades ago, you could go to a car dealership, and when the new models were going to come out, they'd have them in the building, but there'd be newspaper over the glass, and you couldn't see them ahead of time. Nowadays, the cars from television, internet, there's not much surprise left in automobiles anymore, but back then it was a big deal. They went out of their way to keep the car a secret. Even after they had the name, they weren't showing any photos and so forth until April 17th, when it was introduced for sale at the World's Fair and dealerships all across the country. One of the things they did also, they took a television commercial. They had teasers, and I'm going to show you a teaser of the commercial they ran leading up to April 17th, which is pretty neat. They don't surely show you the car up close. You don't really know what it's all about. And they also took newspaper ads. They did it simultaneously in Europe and several other countries worldwide. And when it was at the fair, they had a really neat program to kick it off. And they had 100 newspaper people, automotive press release writers, people, so forth, take the cars from the Westchester Country Club in New York and Long Island all the way to Dearborn, and they went through Canada, Niagara Falls at the time too. So it was kind of neat. Those people, of course, it was a successful run. It was the first Mustang cruise in history, apparently. And they were already inclined then to write nice things about the car. If I get this to play, I want you to hear this. Do I just center button it?
I think so.
I have to figure out how to do this from a... Yeah, I'll come over here and do it.
But it was from 1964, so.
Yes, the television commercial. Television commercials were a little bit different 60 years ago. Here's the inside of the Ford Pavilion. The Ford had one of the biggest and best attended buildings or centers at the World's Fair in 64 and 65. And the car debuted there with a press release. And there's Lee Iacocca talking about it in the car, and of course in the forefront. Interestingly, Ford wanted to outdo GM in this competition, of course. So in 1939, World's Fair in New York, which was held in the same spot, exact same spot, they tore everything down and rebuilt it. After the fair was done, it closed. They had a pavilion also, and in that pavilion, they had Ford cars that were driven by professional drivers. You could ride the new models and went up and around this great big, kind of like a superstructure, like a bridge up in the air. So for this building and this exhibit, they decided to do something different, and they took Ford convertibles, put them on a conveyor belt inside the building, and you sat in them and pretended to drive them yourself. So you got to travel around, and that's where the Mustang convertible made its debut, inside the building, which was really, really kind of a neat thing. Interestingly, Walt Disney, a little bit out of order my slides, I'm sorry, there's the cruise I was telling you about when the reporters went from Westchester to New York, Long Island, all the way through Niagara Falls and on into Dearborn, Michigan. Henry Ford was there, of course. This is the front of the pavilion car. A little bit about the pavilion as I was telling you about. Walt Disney was commissioned to do the program, and he actually narrated They had speakers inside each one of the cars, and he was the narrator for the second year's program. They'd be able to talk him into doing that. He was interested in doing it for a couple of reasons. He wanted to try out some of his technology that he had in mind that he wanted to put into some of his parks. He also was hopeful that Ford would sponsor something at the new Walt Disney World that was going to be built. And there would be a long-term partnership between the two organizations. Unfortunately, that did not materialize. Ford never sponsored anything as intended at Disney, and it didn't go the way he wanted. And also, interesting, Ford spent almost $50 million on the World's Fair building and all the associated programming, which is more than they spent on the development of the Mustang by $2 or $3 million from what I've discovered, which I found amazing. The cost, it went over in cost. That didn't make Henry Ford happy. Disney spent a lot of money putting it together. But I found that some of the things that Disney did on the exhibit, like initially the cars would crash and sometimes stop. Someone I was talking to told me that they had a problem when they were there personally. They remembered as a child that the cars were messed up and some people came through in lab coats and fixed it and got a standing ovation and left. He developed a lot of technology that was used in the haunted house, and several other Disney, the people mover at Disney, came from the World's Fair innovation, which is kind of neat. Of course, I know if I was at the fair, I wouldn't want to get in the Galaxy or the Thunderbird. I would want to sit in the Mustang. So I'm thinking there's probably a lot of lines for that one. And I do have a video showing some people getting in and out of the car for you. That's Henry Ford to the left and Walt Disney to the right. You can see the pavilion itself and kind of a diorama of the cars. You went on a historic scene from prehistoric history up to people's interpretation of the future at that point. So it was a neat thing to see in pictures. If you want to learn more, go on YouTube and just put in New York World's Fair 1964, and you'll have hundreds of choices and things to look at. Disney on the left, Henry Ford in the center, and that's Robert Moses on the right. Robert Moses was the fair director. He was a New York City, he was commissioner of the fair. He was an architectural planner and did a lot of things for New York for many, many decades. It was his hope that the fair would make enough money that they could take the site there and invest it and turn it into a public park. And they finally did some of that down the road, but it didn't. The fair was not as successful financially as everyone hoped it would be. Another video for you in one moment.
The 1964-65 New York World's Fair had some wild modes of transportation on display. But there was only one you could put in your own driveway, and it became an American icon, the Ford Mustang. The 1964-65 New York World's Fair, which wasn't even an officially recognized world exposition, brought together some of the most innovative products of the day. Transistor TVs from Japan, a computer from IBM, and the Telstar satellite, to name a few. But it was Ford that debuted a new product that you could put in your own driveway after the fair. While in development for several years, the New York World's Fair aligned perfectly for the launch of the Mustang. As a sponsor of the 1939-40 New York World's Fair, held at the same location, Ford was a natural to return. But rather than have drivers for their vehicles, as they did in 1939, this time Ford partnered with Walt Disney to create the Magic Skyway, an automatic way of moving people through a series of scenes in real Ford cars. Being introduced at the fair, the Mustang proved to be quite popular on the ride. The same day the Mustang debuted at the fair, it was available at Ford showrooms. And when the fair concluded, even the Mustangs from the attraction were sold.
We would never sell a ride vehicle out of Disneyland. That Ford said that, no, we're going to sell these cars after we use them each year on the attraction, which sounded kind of crazy.
The 1964-65 New York World.
One more real short video for you. It's the only one I could find with actual Mustangs and people moving in them.
The Wilsons have never known anyone from the opposite side of the earth before. decided to see another show together.
The videos bring up a couple of interesting points. The theme or motto of the fair was peace through understanding. So it was an international event, but interestingly also, one of the people in the first video I showed you said something about the fact that it wasn't actually a real World's Fair. There was one held in the United States. There was a group that governed or a board that governed World's Fairs, and you had to have almost be granted or have a license to hold a World's Fair. And one was held in another part of the United States several years ago, and there was a time frame before you could reapply and have one in the same country. So that didn't bother Robert Moses one bit. He said, we're still going to have the fair, we're still going to have it this time. And several countries boycotted the fair because of that, because it wasn't an official sanctioned world exposition. But his point was, well, if the countries don't come, that means more space for me to put commercial ventures in here and make more money. So it didn't phase him one bit, for better or worse. Mustang was an instant success right out of the box. It was one of the first, fastest cars to sell 1 million units in the history of automobile manufacturing. There's just a few. It started a new segment called the pony car, which was soon followed by things like the Barracuda, the Camaro, the Firebird, the Javelin, a whole host of cars that ushered in the muscle car age. They were ambitiously thinking they would sell 150,000 cars the first year. They sold 480,000 the first year. And they were also so strapped for production, they took a chance and opened up 2 additional plants, New Jersey, Michigan, and California, 3 plants for 1 car. They were also the first and I think only car ever to be awarded a Tiffany Gold Medal Award for Excellence, which is kind of another neat thing. This is the last video.
Ford Mustang with this gold medal award for excellence in American design. Mustang, excitingly versatile, unexpectedly practical, with a wide list of options to make it even more luxurious or give it even more sports car performance. This is Mustang, an unexpected car at an unexpected price. Only $2,368 FOB Detroit. And that includes luxury features that are available only at extra cost in many other cars. See the unexpected. The new Ford Mustang, now at your Ford dealers. Mustang.
The car also brought a lot of success for Lee Iacocca. He was on the cover of both Newsweek and Time. As people might know, his career with Ford eventually ended. He was fired by Henry Ford II, and he went on to have a second career that was almost as strong as the chairman of Chrysler Motors, and he was on the cover of international magazines again when the minivan was introduced, another one of his projects, and the K-Car series, which were two of his best-selling cars. So he's had quite a substantial impact on American automotive history. The 64.5 Mustang, it's not really the thing. We talked about that a little while ago. There is no such thing, really. I have seen cars registered as 64s with their titles and so forth, but technically they're all 1965s according to their VINs. This is my car that's out front. Got a World's Fair medallion on the front of it. The Peace Through Understanding was kind of an interesting concept. Has anyone seen the Unisphere in New York City, outside New York City? It's still in existence. That's one of the few things that's still there. The big round circle, it's right across your way to Long Island. And I was very lucky. Iacocca lost his first wife to diabetes, and in his retirement, he started a foundation for innovative diabetes research. And the first owner of my Mustang sent the dash in to have him sign it. And I have the email from his secretary, and it says, the gentleman made a donation to the foundation. In return, he got his dash signed, which is now my dash. The secretary said, I got your package, I opened it up, took it over to Mr. Iacocca. He didn't know what it was at first, then we saw the Mustang emblem, got a big smile on his face and asked for the felt tip pen. So, most Mustang owners have Carroll Shelby's signature, because Carroll Shelby's the coveted one. He's gone also like Lee Iacocca, but I thought it was pretty neat to have Lee Iacocca's at mine since he's the father of the car. I am the executive director of America's Transportation Experience, the AACA Museum in Hershey. I have some more information for you. If I haven't given you a newsletter yet, I would be happy to do so. And love to have you come visit. We're also a Smithsonian affiliate like this museum here, so I'm hoping we can work together at some point in the future. We have 3 floors of automobiles. The lower floor is full of 10 full-size buses, including one that was used in Forrest Gump. If you saw the movie, you'll recognize it instantly. One from the movie Speed. We have a couple other celebrity cars like Betty White's personal Cadillac from 1977 and Whitney Houston's limousine. Also have the largest collection of Tucker 48 automobiles in the country. We have three of the I think 51 Tuckers that were built, along with a movie car made of fiberglass from the Francis Ford Coppola movie and a test chassis, and all the archives. So a lot of cool things to see. Encourage you to come visit us. And the reason I ended up here is because we have, I thought I had one more slide. The museum is sponsoring the feature tent at the Das Fest Festival coming up in August at Bukunji Park. So we're putting together a tent to cover all the different generations of the Mustang. That's what ended up bringing me here and making this connection. So happy to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about World's Fairs, Mustangs, or the museum. Thank you. Yes, sir. This question is, do I feel the Studebaker Avante was an influence on the Mustang? I think they came out right almost the same time. Maybe a year earlier for the Avante. The Avante, for those who don't know, everyone know what an Avante is? 2-seat sports car, fiberglass. Do you have an Avante?
No, I'm from Indiana, and it was supposed to be the pace car in '63, and it didn't get production. It ended up being the Lark. So. Okay, yeah, I do know the Lark was the, yeah. That's a good question. We have one at the museum, and I don't know. Can anyone tell me, is the Avante a 2 or 4-seater? 2? It is a 2-seater, so it's a sports car in essence. And I know the Avante was very ahead of its time. It's one of the few cars, you could take the Avante, I read somewhere from a critic said, you could take the Avante and drop it out of the sky on an interstate in any decade of American history, and it will be out of place, equally out of place, any decade. So, but it is a cool car. It's made of fiberglass. It set a lot of land speed records when it came out. Unfortunately, Studebaker was pretty much on its last legs by that point, because it is a pretty cool car. Yes, sir?
The Iacocca was the person who initiated picking reused cars and to anthropomorphize cars as a way of selling them. When Ford invented the Mustang, were they thinking of this, and did they choose him because of it, and how did they make it get the speed that it had?
His question is about whether Ford picked Iacocca before the Mustang. It was actually his idea, along with a couple other executives at Ford that wanted to do the car because they knew there was a market, a hole in the market, and they knew the baby boomers coming of age would want cars. They wanted something they could personalize, and they wanted something sporty. But they also knew it would be a great second car for a family. So it's just the right time, the right place, right time, and the right combination of events.
Was the way it's made depicted with speed and getting around fast intended for the baby boomers to have a generation associated car?
Yes, the essence of speed, the fact that they wanted the car to look like it was fast when it was sitting still, was aimed at the baby boomers, yes. Any other questions? Yes?
What percentage of the early Mustangs were V6 versus V8?
Surprisingly, the 6-cylinder inline 6 was not a great seller. People opted for the V8, which was a couple $100 more. And honestly, I've driven both, and if you get a 4-speed with a 6-cylinder, it'll still get around pretty good, but with automatic transmission, it doesn't go very up to speed very fast. They actually had, and I should have brought some of these things. My office is decorated with all kinds of Mustang literature and posters, and they had two campaigns that stand out for me. They did a Mustang Secretary, the Secretary 6 they called it, and they advertised the Mustang with a 6-cylinder for women. I know lots of women who want a V8 too, so. But that was one of their sales campaigns because the 6 was not a big seller. So, and also, they advertised the Select Shift Automatic. The one poster I have, it says, "Don't see a divorce counselor," and it shows a guy with his hat on, his wife, and they're standing face to face with each other, and it says, she wants an automatic, he wants a stick, get the Select Shift, you can manually go up and down with it.
Was it V8?
a V8 is an engine with 8 cylinders, and it's in a V shape. So there's 4 cylinders on each side of a V, whereas an inline engine has all the cylinders straight in a row. Yes, Bob?
Jeff, don't you have some wonderful events happening at your museum this month, like Model T driving experience and some other things?
We have all kinds of great events. We have a free car show next Saturday. If you want to come, it's a great time to see the museum. You'll see 300 or 400 cars in the show field as well. It's free. Have some information up here. Right, yeah, that's our building, and that's the front of the building. But we'll have cars surrounding the whole entire.
I think the page you just lifted up right here.
Oh.
That's an Avanti.
Oh. Yes, for those, the car in white is an Avanti. It's very angular. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't look like anything in the history of automobiles. It stands out by itself. We have one that was donated by one of our volunteers who restored it. He passed away a couple years ago and left it to us. We have a great collection of all kinds of cars, and we'd love to have you come visit us. As Bob mentioned, we do have a Model T driving experience where you can learn how to drive a Model T. Has anyone here ever driven a Model T? You two can't raise your hands. Have you taken our course?
No.
But you've driven one at probably.
Jack with Gap is trying to teach me.
Okay.
We have a Model T out here in a lot.
I know, and that's why I'm not letting them put their hands up, because I know they know how to drive a Model T. Model T is interesting though. We have a school where you spend about 3 or 4 hours with us, and by the time you're done, you can drive it pretty much on your own. If you know how to drive a standard, there's 3 pedals. Forget everything you know with a Model T. It also has 3 pedals, but they don't make any sense. They're all different. So it's kind of neat to drive a car that's 100 years old. We have 5 of them, and you get to drive all of them going through. Inevitably, one of them breaks down every time on the. So we have enough for insurance purposes, get you enough to drive through. But one breaks every time. We fix it on Monday and start all over again. Yes?
Avanti moved to Canada.
Studebaker moved their last year of production to Canada, and they used Chevrolet engines, I believe. The very last year they were in business. But the Avanti was already gone by that point, I think. But there is such a thing called an Avanti 2 that comes with GM engines and other engines as well. Some people bought the rights. I think they were former Studebaker employees or managers or someone bought the rights to the Avanti, the sports car, and they reproduced it going forward. And it may still be in business. It's been in and out a couple times, but it may still be available. They're looking, body-wise, they're pretty similar to the original. Sir?
When I was in England back in the 70s, I saw a Mustang for Britain with the steering wheel on the right. What did the Mustang do overseas?
His question is, when he was in Britain in about 1970, he saw a Mustang with a steering wheel on the opposite side on the right. Mustang, interestingly, Mustang is now the only car Ford still makes, the only passenger car. They do SUVs and trucks, no more passenger cars. One of the engineers told me they can switch back to cars in very short notice if they ever have to, based on one of the SUV chassis. But their only car is the Mustang, and the Mustang has been revived, and a lot of its sales are now in Europe and foreign countries. So and they also have the Mach-E, which is an electric version, but it's technically not a Mustang. But Mustang is now probably more popular in Europe and across overseas than it's ever been before. Initially, I think the numbers that went over were in the hundreds per year. Mostly they were imported or taken over by people who were in the military. And they were all called, in Germany they were called T5s, which I mentioned earlier was the code name for the Project Mustang before it had a name. They called them T5s in Germany because someone named, I think it was either a firearm or a truck manufacturer had the name Mustang patented. So they couldn't use the name Mustang without paying a fee. And Ford was so short-sighted that instead of spending the $5,000 or $10,000 in the fee, they decided they would call every car over there in Germany a T5, which meant changing all the literature, all the badges, all the press, everything. And they did that for like 20 years. And they could have had it for $10,000 and shared the marketing, the rights on it. So yes, there are some over there in Europe, but more now than ever before. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the ownership of the name, and Mustang has stayed kind of the same type of car. There was the Boston, there was the Mach 1 and things like that. So it's always that kind of sporty car.
Right.
What I noticed only about a year ago, the Maverick is not a Maverick anymore, but they own the name. How long can you own a name like that?
That's a good question. You said, how long can you own a name? I think you can patent it on an automobile application. If you renew it, I think you can keep it.
It's a trademark, and the law is you can only own the trademark as long as it is in actual commerce. So the oldest car is Chevrolet Suburban. That was from the 30s.
Correct.
But there was always a Chevrolet Suburban. You could have a car called the Edsel because they don't make it anymore. And it only applies to the particular category, which is why there's Cadillac dog food and stuff like that. But if you want to have a Cadillac car, you'll be in court tomorrow morning, probably.
Did everyone hear that okay? Yeah, thank you for that. Those are good points. And to your point also, the Maverick car was out of production for a long time. So it was interesting to me when Ford brought back that nameplate on a very small pickup truck, which sold very well in its first year out. It's fairly new still, but it's a very small pickup truck. It has nothing to do with the original car. Thank you for bringing that point up. Yes?
The Mercury Cougar, so how was that differentiated from what was the sales goal
Sure.
in terms of that?
Mercury Cougar is kind of a sister car to the Mustang, such as the Firebird was to Camaro back in those points. It's on in that period. It's built in the same chassis, but it was the Mercury version of the Mustang. So the drivetrains were all similar. The chassis, the dimensions were pretty much similar, but the bodies were a little bit different. They were built differently. So Ford having three divisions, the two of the three divisions, Ford and Mercury, and Lincoln not so much, but Ford and Mercury wanted to have performance cars. It was the same way with GM and Chrysler. All the brands wanted a performance vehicle. So I don't know what the goals ever were for the Cougar, but I know it was never, in terms of sales, it was probably at its best, still less than half the Mustang, probably a quarter.
Was it meant to be more luxurious?
Yeah, good point. The Cougar was meant to be more luxurious right from the start. It would have more amenities in it, even in a stripped-down base version. Where the stripped-down Mustang doesn't have much going for it, and you just add things as you go along. Good point. Yeah, the Mercury was a little bit more luxurious. Anything else? Yes?
I have an old 65 Willie CJ Jeep, and it's never been painted, but the paint job is going. In your opinion, should I get it resprayed or leave it as it is?
It depends on how bad the paint is. A lot of car collectors like original paint and patina as long as it's not so bad that it's rusted or falling apart. You know, a lot of people will paint over rust and preserve it these days and encapsulate it so it doesn't get any worse.
There's very little rust, it's just faded.
Well, I'd leave it. Not seeing it, my first thought would be to leave it. You know, because once you paint it, then you're going to want to restore the interior and everything else, and you'll never stop. That's something that would be for me. Anything else? Well, I appreciate your attention and listening to me, and I hope you learned something about the Mustang. I learn something new about it every day, so I'm happy to be here and hope you'll come visit the museum and come to if you want to see a lot of Mustangs again, come to McCungy Park for Das Fest in the first Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of August. Thank you.